The music hall was buzzing with energy that afternoon. People of all ages had gathered for the community music session, each one eager to show their talent or simply enjoy the sounds around them. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting a warm glow on the wooden floors, the polished piano shining at the center of the room like a crown jewel. It was a place where talent met opportunity, but it was also a place where judgment and comparison could quietly creep in. Lena, a quiet young woman in her early 20s, stepped cautiously into the hall. She had come on a simple impulse, drawn by the sound of music from outside. She wasn't dressed to impress. Her clothes were plain, her hair tied back loosely, and she carried a small bag that had seen better days. She felt like an outsider the moment she entered. People were chatting in clusters, laughing and pointing at the piano as if it were a trophy. Lena felt a twinge of nervousness. Unsure if she belonged here at all, she moved to a quiet corner near the back and took a seat on one of the wooden chairs. From there, she could see the entire hall, the grand piano resting majestically in the center. People were taking turns playing, and their performances ranged from beginner mistakes to surprisingly skilled pieces. Lena listened quietly, tapping her fingers on her lap in time with the music. She had always loved the piano. Even though she rarely performed in front of others, across the room, a figure caught her attention. Adrian, a young man known in local circles for his piano skills, was leaning casually against a wall, arms crossed, a smug smile on his face. He had an air of confidence that bordered on arrogance. His performances were always flawless, and he carried himself with a sense of superiority that often made others feel small. Adrian's eyes scanned the hall, and when they fell on Lena, his smirk grew wider. He whispered something to the people next to him, and Lena noticed their subtle snickers. She felt a heat rise to her cheeks. It wasn't the first time she had been judged for her quiet demeanor or simple appearance, but she wasn't used to facing such blatant mockery in a room full of strangers. Her hands clenched lightly in her lap as she tried to calm her racing heart. The organizer of the event, a cheerful woman with a love for music, walked to the center of the room. "We welcome everyone to try the piano today," she announced. "Even if you've never played in front of an audience, don't be shy. Step up and let your music be heard." Her eyes sparkled as she gestured toward the grand piano. A few people stepped forward immediately, eager to show off their skills. Lena watched quietly, still unsure if she should join. She didn't want attention. She didn't want judgment. But a small voice inside her, one she had ignored for too long, whispered that maybe this was her moment. Maybe this was the day she would let her love for music speak for her. Adrian, noticing her hesitation, leaned toward a friend and said loudly enough for Lena to hear, "I wonder if she even knows which end of the piano to sit on." The laughter that followed made her flinch. It was cruel, yet casual, the kind of cruelty that masked itself as humor. She could feel every eye in the room turning toward her, and for a moment she considered leaving, but then she remembered her grandfather, who had taught her to play the piano when she was a child. He wasn't a famous musician. He was a simple man who loved music more than anything. He had told her countless times that music isn't about impressing others. It's about pouring your heart into every note and letting the world feel what you feel. That memory gave her a small, quiet strength. Lena took a deep breath and straightened her back. She whispered to herself, "I can do this." She slowly rose from her chair and walked toward the piano. Each step felt heavy, yet freeing. The murmurs of the crowd faded into the background as her focus narrowed to the polished keys ahead of her. Adrian's eyes followed her every move, and his smirk deepened. "This is going to be entertaining," he muttered, half to himself and half to the people near him. He was certain she would stumble, that her attempt would be laughable. To him, this was a chance to reinforce his own superiority. As Lena approached the piano, the room grew quieter, sensing a change in the atmosphere. People stopped talking, curious about the quiet girl who had suddenly decided to step forward. Her hands hovered above the keys for a moment. She didn't rush. She didn't speak. She simply let herself feel the presence of the piano beneath her fingers, remembering every lesson her grandfather had given her. Every note she had practiced in solitude. The first thing that struck her was the warmth of the keys. They felt like an old friend, familiar and steady. She placed her hands gently on them, taking another deep breath. The nervous energy in her chest began to settle, replaced by a quiet focus. This was not about proving anything to Adrian or to anyone else in the room. This was about her connection with the music, and through it, a connection with herself. Adrian, still leaning against the wall, whispered sarcastically, "Don't break the piano, little lady." Some of his friends laughed softly. Lena ignored them, centering herself. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, allowing herself to imagine the melodies she had dreamed of playing for years. She didn't think about impressing anyone. She only thought about the music, pure and unfiltered. She pressed the first key. It was a soft note, but it carried an unusual warmth, like a quiet promise. Lena's fingers moved with purpose, gliding over the keys, recalling the intricate patterns she had practiced endlessly. The sound began to fill the room in a way that made people stop and listen. There was a clarity and depth to it that felt surprising coming from someone who looked so unassuming. Adrian's smirk faltered. He raised his eyebrows slightly, confused. The sound he was hearing did not match the image he had painted in his mind. He had expected something clumsy, amateurish, a performance that would be quickly forgotten. Instead, he heard something compelling, a voice speaking through the piano. Delicate yet confident, humble yet filled with passion. The audience's attention shifted completely. People who had been chatting, joking, or scrolling through their phones suddenly leaned forward, captivated by the girl in front of the piano. There was a hush that had settled over the hall, a rare silence that came from genuine awe rather than polite courtesy. Lena continued to play, letting the notes flow naturally. Her fingers danced across the keys with a combination of skill and emotion that seemed impossible for someone so quiet and ordinary-looking. Every chord, every gentle crescendo told a story. People could almost feel the journey she had taken to get to this moment, the years of practice hidden behind her simplicity. Adrian, unable to look away, felt a shift within him. His confidence, which had seemed unshakable, began to waver. He realized he had underestimated her completely. The arrogance that had guided him through countless performances and awards suddenly seemed fragile in the face of someone who didn't need to prove anything to anyone, yet commanded respect effortlessly. Lena's eyes were still closed as she played the last few notes. She didn't rush to impress. She didn't add unnecessary flourishes. She simply let the music speak. When she finally lifted her hands, the hall remained silent for a brief heartbeat, a silence filled with astonishment and respect. Then, slowly, people began to clap. Not polite applause, but genuine, heartfelt appreciation. Adrian leaned back, speechless. His usual charm and smugness had been replaced by shock and something new, admiration. He had been ready to dominate the room with his skill and belittle anyone who tried to challenge him, but instead, he had encountered a force of music so pure and effortless that it demanded acknowledgement. Lena opened her eyes, met the gaze of the audience, and gave a small, shy smile. She felt a mix of relief and quiet pride. This was more than just a performance. It was a statement, not loud or confrontational, but undeniable. She had faced the mockery and judgment, and instead of letting it shake her, she had let the music speak for her. Even in the back of the hall, Adrian found himself clapping slowly, almost involuntarily. The smirk was gone. He realized that true skill was not about showing off or winning approval, but about authenticity, heart, and the courage to simply play. And in that moment, Lena had done all of that without even trying to impress anyone. The room slowly returned to normal, conversations resuming, people whispering about the performance they had just witnessed. But some things had changed. Lena had left an impression that would linger in their minds. Adrian, for the first time, was humbled, learning an unspoken lesson about underestimating others. And Lena, quiet and simple, had found a moment of triumph that was hers alone, a quiet victory that resonated far deeper than applause ever could. After Lena's first few notes had filled the hall, a hush had settled over the crowd. People who had been chatting or whispering now watched her closely, captivated by the music that seemed to flow effortlessly from her fingers. Even those who were used to seeing confident performers couldn't take their eyes off her. Lena's shy smile remained as she continued to play, her mind fully focused on the music. But across the room, Adrian's expression had completely changed. He had come into the hall confident, ready to showcase his skill and, in his mind, prove that he was the best pianist in the room. He had expected to watch someone clumsily attempt the piano, maybe stumble over a few notes, and then fade away, leaving him and his reputation untouchable. But now he was confused, almost shaken. He couldn't understand how someone so quiet and unassuming could command the piano with such ease. Every note was clear, every rhythm precise, and yet there was an emotion in the music that he himself often struggled to achieve. Lena, unaware of the attention she had drawn from Adrian specifically, kept playing. She allowed herself to get lost in the sound, letting her fingers glide over the keys with a confidence that seemed almost effortless. She remembered the countless hours she had spent practicing in her small living room at home, under the guidance of her grandfather's gentle encouragement. He had never cared about fame, competitions, or applause. He only cared about the love of music and the way it could touch people's hearts. Today, Lena felt she was honoring his memory with every note she played. Some people in the audience started to whisper among themselves. "Who is she?" one asked. "I've never seen her before, but she's incredible," another said. Lena's music was not just technically impressive. It had a feeling, a soul. It was clear she wasn't playing to show off. She was playing because she loved it, and that made every note resonate even more deeply. Adrian, still standing near the back, could no longer hide his disbelief. He leaned forward slightly, his usual smirk gone, replaced by a frown. He had always believed that skill was enough to impress people, that confidence and appearances could make someone seem untouchable. But Lena had broken all of that in the span of a few minutes. She didn't act confident. She didn't flaunt her talent. She simply let the music speak, and the room responded, finally. When Lena finished her piece, there was a moment of silence so complete that it seemed like the air itself had paused. Then slowly, applause began to fill the hall. It started with a few people who were closest to her, then grew louder and louder as more people joined in. Some even stood up, clapping with genuine admiration. Lena felt a warmth in her chest, not from pride, but from the realization that her music had reached people, had touched them in a way that words could not. Adrian, however, remained still. He clapped quietly, almost reluctantly, unable to fully process what had just happened. His confidence had been challenged, his assumptions proven wrong. For the first time, he realized that skill alone did not make a musician truly remarkable. Lena had something he hadn't learned yet, the ability to connect with her audience. Through sincerity and emotion. After the applause died down, the organizer of the event approached Lena, her eyes shining. "That was beautiful," she said warmly. "I think everyone here felt it." "You have a real gift?" Lena nodded shyly, unsure of what to say. Compliments had never been her comfort zone. She had learned to let her music speak for her because words often failed her. Meanwhile, Adrian walked slowly toward her, his mind racing. He had been proud of his own abilities, often thinking of himself as untouchable in this community. But today, Lena had changed everything. She had played without arrogance, without needing recognition, yet she had captured the hearts of everyone in the room. He found himself admiring her skill, though he wouldn't admit it out loud. Your performance," Adrian began, his voice slightly hesitant. It was impressive." He was not used to admitting that someone had outshined him. Usually he only offered compliments if he truly believed they were deserved, and even then he did it with a hint of superiority. But today there was no room for superiority. Lena had won something that no amount of training or technique could buy. Authenticity. Lena smiled faintly, her hands still resting on the piano keys. "Thank you," she replied softly. I love playing." There was a simplicity in her words that spoke volumes. She wasn't trying to compete or prove anything. She played because music was part of her, and for her, that was enough. As people continued to discuss her performance, Adrian realized that this moment was a turning point for him. He had spent so much time worrying about technique, competitions, and recognition that he had forgotten the true heart of music. Watching Lena reminded him of why he had fallen in love with the piano in the first place. It wasn't about winning or being the best in the room. It was about expression, connection, and feeling. Some of Adrian's friends approached him, whispering about Lena. "Did you see her? She's amazing," one said. Adrian nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. He couldn't stop thinking about how he had underestimated her. He had let his pride and arrogance cloud his judgment, and now he had a lesson he wouldn't forget easily. Meanwhile, Lena quietly gathered her things, feeling a mix of relief and quiet happiness. She had faced the judgment, the smirks, and the doubts, and she had done exactly what she had come to do. She had played from her heart. For Lena, that was victory enough. She didn't need applause or recognition, though she felt grateful for it. What mattered most was that she had remained true to herself, and in doing so, she had shown others something important without even trying. The room slowly returned to normal. People returning to conversations and casual music making. But there was a sense of respect in the air now, a recognition that talent came in many forms and that appearances could be deceiving. Lena moved toward the back of the hall, quietly slipping into a seat, her heart still racing from the experience. Adrian, still near the piano, watched her from a distance. He realized that this was not a defeat for him, but a lesson. A lesson in humility, in paying attention to substance over style, in recognizing that true talent often comes quietly and unexpectedly. He had always valued skill, but now he understood that heart mattered just as much, if not more. For Lena, the rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of music, applause, and quiet conversations. People approached her, asking questions about her background and her training. She answered simply, never exaggerating or boasting. She wanted to share her love of music, not her ego, and in doing so, she left a lasting impression on everyone she encountered. By the end of the session, Lena felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced before. She had faced the ridicule, the doubt, and the skepticism, and she had come out stronger. The experience had reminded her that courage wasn't always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it was simply stepping forward, doing what you loved, and letting your actions speak louder than anyone's words. Adrian, for his part, left the hall that day with a new perspective. He realized that being a great pianist wasn't just about skill, but about connecting with people, being humble, and respecting others' abilities, no matter how quiet or unassuming they seemed. He had been taught a lesson he wouldn't forget, and he knew that in the future he would approach music and people differently. As the hall emptied, Lena lingered for a moment, gazing at the piano. It had been a simple session, just another community gathering, but for her, it had been life-changing. She had faced judgment, surpassed expectations, and most importantly, she had stayed true to herself. Music, she realized, had a power that words never could. It could transform doubt into admiration, fear into confidence, and silence into awe. And as she finally left the hall, Lena carried with her not just the memory of applause, but the quiet satisfaction of knowing that she had touched hearts with nothing but her talent, her courage, and her love for music. It was a moment that would stay with her forever, a reminder that sometimes the simplest gestures, a single note, a single performance, could change everything. The next day, Lena couldn't stop thinking about the music hall and what had happened there. She had never imagined that a single performance could make such an impression on so many people, including someone like Adrian, who had always seemed untouchable. Even as she went about her usual routine, the memory of the piano, the notes, and the silence that had followed her playing lingered in her mind. It was a strange mixture of nervousness and excitement, a feeling she wasn't used to. Adrian, on the other hand, could not shake the image of Lena at the piano. He had replayed her performance in his head countless times since leaving the hall. Each note, each pause, each delicate touch of the keys haunted him. He couldn't understand how someone so quiet, so unassuming, could command attention without even trying. It bothered him, though he didn't want to admit it. For the first time, he felt a twinge of humility, a sensation he had rarely experienced. Word of Lena's performance spread quickly in the local music community. People who had been at the session talked about her in hushed tones, describing her as a hidden talent or a surprise star. Some even speculated about her background, trying to guess where she had learned to play with such skill. Lena, however, did not seek attention. She wanted nothing more than to play the piano and let the music speak for her. The attention felt strange, almost uncomfortable, but she accepted it with quiet grace. A few days later, the music hall hosted another open session. Lena decided to attend not because she wanted recognition, but because she genuinely loved the atmosphere and the chance to hear others play. She walked in quietly, her hands tucked into her pockets, and found a seat near the back. She noticed Adrian immediately. He was sitting near the front this time, seemingly waiting for something or someone. When their eyes met, there was a brief moment of acknowledgement. He didn't smirk this time, but his gaze was curious, even cautious. The session began as usual, with various performers taking turns at the piano. Some played well, others less so, but Lena listened quietly, enjoying the variety. Her heart was calm, her nerves settled. She wasn't planning to play this time, but she couldn't help feeling a sense of anticipation. She had faced the challenge once, and now she wanted to see how the music hall and its participants would respond to her presence again. Adrian, on the other hand, seemed restless. He had been used to dominating every piano session he attended, to being the center of attention. But ever since Lena's performance, something had shifted. He found himself comparing every player to her, noticing that no one seemed to have the same depth or emotion in their music. His confidence felt fragile, and he didn't like it. He was used to being admired, not humbled. As the session continued, the organizer made an announcement. "If anyone else wants to play today, now is the chance," she said warmly. The room turned silent, and several participants hesitated. Lena's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't sure if she should play again. The first time had been unforgettable, but the pressure now felt heavier. Everyone knew her talent, and expectations were high. The thought of disappointing anyone, especially Adrian, made her stomach tighten. Adrian, noticing her hesitation, leaned forward slightly, a faint smirk returning to his face. "Come on, little lady," he said softly, just loud enough for her to hear. "Let's see if it was a one-time thing or if you really can play." The comment was teasing, but not malicious. Still, Lena felt a spark of challenge. She wasn't going to let anyone reduce her talent to a joke. Not even Adrian. She slowly rose from her seat and walked toward the piano. The room grew quieter, the air thick with anticipation. People watched her, some with curiosity, others with admiration. Lena's hands hovered over the keys, and she took a deep breath, centering herself. She reminded herself that this was not about proving anything to anyone. It was about the music, about the connection she felt whenever her fingers touched the keys. As she played the first note, a calm confidence washed over her. This time she allowed herself to explore more freely, letting the melody flow in a way that felt natural and unforced. Each chord resonated through the hall, and Lena felt a deep sense of satisfaction as the music carried her emotions outward. She played with more freedom than before, allowing her heart to guide her fingers rather than her mind. The audience was captivated. People leaned forward, listening intently to the music that seemed to tell a story without words. Even those who had been skeptical before were now enchanted, drawn in by the authenticity and emotion that Lena poured into every note. The room felt alive, vibrating with the energy of the piano and the hearts of those listening. Adrian stood quietly near the back, watching with a mix of awe and frustration. He had never seen anyone play with such ease and emotion. His own hands itched to touch the keys, to try to match her skill, but he hesitated. There was something in Lena's performance that he couldn't replicate, no matter how hard he tried. She had a way of making the piano speak, of making the audience feel, that he had never experienced before. As the piece continued, Lena closed her eyes, lost in the music. She didn't notice the audience, didn't notice Adrian, didn't even notice time passing. All that mattered was the connection she felt with the piano and the emotions she was expressing through it. Each note carried a piece of her story, the hours of practice, the quiet afternoons spent learning from her grandfather, the moments of doubt she had overcome. When she finally finished, the hall erupted in applause once more. This time, the clapping was louder, more enthusiastic. People cheered, some standing, others whistling in appreciation. Lena opened her eyes and looked around, feeling a mixture of gratitude and humility. She had shared something deeply personal, and the response had been overwhelming in the most positive way. Adrian, however, remained still for a moment, processing what he had just witnessed. He had expected to see someone falter, to see a hint of nervousness or imperfection. Instead, he saw mastery and emotion, combined in a way that was both powerful and subtle. He realized that Lena's talent was not just technical skill, it was something far deeper, something that could not be measured by practice alone. Finally, Adrian approached her. His steps were careful, almost hesitant. He stopped in front of the piano and looked at her with a mixture of respect and curiosity. You played beautifully," he said, his voice softer than usual. "I didn't expect that." There was a pause, a moment where both of them simply looked at each other, understanding passing silently between them. Lena smiled faintly, a quiet acknowledgement. "Thank you," she said softly. I love playing." "That's all?" Her words were simple, but they carried a depth that touched Adrian in a way he hadn't anticipated. She wasn't trying to compete, to impress, or to prove anything. She was simply being herself, and that authenticity was what made her performance unforgettable. The rest of the session continued, but the mood in the room had shifted. People seemed more respectful, more attentive. There was an unspoken understanding that talent could come in many forms and that appearances could be deceiving. Lena returned to her seat, her heart still racing, but this time with a sense of calm pride. She had faced the challenge again, and she had done so with grace and confidence. Adrian, meanwhile, sat quietly, reflecting on what he had witnessed. He realized that he had learned a valuable lesson, that humility, respect, and an open mind were as important in music as talent and technique. He had underestimated Lena, and in doing so, he had been reminded that true skill could appear in the most unexpected places. As the session came to an end, Lena packed her things slowly, savoring the feeling of accomplishment. She didn't need to boast or seek attention. She knew that she had shared something meaningful, and that was enough. The experience had strengthened her confidence, not in a boastful way, but in a quiet, profound understanding of her own abilities and love for music. Adrian approached her one last time before leaving. "I hope we can play together sometime," he said, a hint of sincerity in his voice. "I think I have a lot to learn from you." Lena nodded, a small smile on her face. She realized that her performance had not only touched the audience, but had also inspired someone she had once feared. It was a reminder that music had the power to break down barriers, to teach humility, and to bring people together as they left the hall. Both Lena and Adrian carried with them a new perspective. For Lena, it was the quiet satisfaction of knowing that she had stayed true to herself. For Adrian, it was the lesson that talent alone was never enough, that heart, humility, and sincerity were equally important. And for the audience, it was a performance they would remember, not just for the music, but for the story it told about courage, authenticity, and the unexpected ways in which people could inspire each other. The following week, the community music hall was once again alive with activity. This time, there was a sense of expectation in the air. People whispered to one another about Lena, the quiet young woman whose performances had captivated everyone. Even those who had not witnessed her before were curious, eager to see if the stories about her talent were true. The hall had never been so filled with a mixture of anticipation, excitement, and quiet tension. Lena arrived early, as she usually did, carrying her small bag and wearing her simple clothes. She didn't come for recognition, but because she loved the atmosphere, the music, and the chance to hear others play. As she entered, she noticed Adrian already there. He was standing near the piano, looking unusually thoughtful. His expression was no longer smug or confident. Instead, it was serious, almost reflective. Something had clearly changed in him since the last session. She found a quiet spot near the back, observing the room. People were settling in, chatting quietly, tuning instruments, and preparing for their performances. There was a sense of nervous excitement, as if everyone knew something special was about to happen. Lena felt a familiar flutter of nerves, but this time it was mixed with quiet confidence. She had performed before, and she knew the power of letting her music speak for itself. Adrian, watching her from the front, felt a strange mix of anticipation and unease. He had never encountered a performer like Lena. She wasn't loud or flashy, but there was something undeniable about her presence. Her previous performances had humbled him, showing him that music was more than skill and appearances. It was heart, feeling, and authenticity. For the first time, he found himself curious not just about her talent, but about the person behind it. The session began with several performers, each trying to impress the audience. Some played well, others less so, but none could match the quiet depth that Lena had displayed. The room was attentive, but there was an unspoken acknowledgement that something unique was about to happen. People who had been skeptical or dismissive in the past were now watching Lena closely, wondering if she would play again, and if so, what she would reveal this time. When the organizer announced that anyone could take a turn at the piano, Lena felt a familiar tug in her chest. She didn't need to play, but something inside her told her that this was the moment to truly express herself. She rose from her seat slowly, her hands brushing her bag as she walked toward the piano. The crowd fell silent, sensing the gravity of the moment. Adrian's eyes followed her, and for the first time there was no smirk. He felt a strange tension, a mix of respect and curiosity, wondering what she would do this time. Lena's steps were deliberate but unhurried. She approached the piano, placed her hands on the keys, and took a deep, steadying breath. She closed her eyes briefly, centering herself and allowing the music to flow through her. The first note she played was soft, delicate, yet carried a weight that immediately drew the room in. Her fingers moved with precision, grace, and confidence. The melody she created was unlike anything the audience had heard from her before, richer, more expressive, more alive. There was a feeling of storytelling in the music, as if each note carried a memory, an emotion, a piece of her soul. People in the audience leaned forward, captivated by the performance. They had expected skill, but what Lena offered was something far greater: emotion, authenticity, and a connection that transcended technical ability. Even those who had seen her play before were mesmerized, realizing that each performance she gave seemed to reveal a deeper layer of her talent. Adrian stood silently, unable to look away. He had faced many performers in his life, some talented, some extraordinary, but he had never witnessed anything like this. Lena's music was not just notes on a page or practice skill. It was a living, breathing expression of her heart. Her ability to communicate so powerfully without words left him both awed and humbled. As the piece progressed, Lena's confidence grew. She allowed herself to explore the piano fully, letting her fingers move freely, following the natural flow of the music. There was a sense of liberation in her playing, as if each note released a piece of her soul into the room. The audience could feel it, almost physically, as the music seemed to wrap around them, drawing them into her world. The hall was silent except for the sound of the piano. Every breath, every rustle, every heartbeat seemed to synchronize with her performance. Lena's music had a power that transcended words, making people stop thinking and start feeling. There was beauty in the way she played, but also vulnerability, honesty, and a sense of intimacy that was rare in public performances. Adrian felt a mix of emotions he had never experienced before. Pride, admiration, envy, and humility all swirled together as he watched Lena play. He realized that her talent was more than technical mastery. It was the courage to be herself, the bravery to express her deepest emotions, and the wisdom to let the music speak without interference from ego. For the first time, he understood that being a great musician was not just about impressing others, but about touching their hearts. The climax of her performance arrived gently but powerfully. The music swelled, building in intensity, carrying the audience along with it. Lena's hands moved across the keys with fluidity and purpose, each chord resonating with meaning. The emotional depth of the piece reached its peak, and the room seemed to hold its breath, completely absorbed. People's eyes were closed, their bodies leaning slightly forward, as if trying to catch every note, every nuance. every emotion that Lena conveyed. Finally, the last note lingered in the air, fading slowly, leaving a silence so profound that it felt sacred. The audience didn't move immediately, caught in the afterglow of what they had just experienced. Then, as if awakening from a spell, they erupted into applause. The clapping was thunderous, echoing off the walls, some people standing, some cheering loudly, all showing their admiration and respect. Adrian remained still for a moment, processing what he had witnessed. The performance had not only captivated the audience, but had completely changed his perspective. He had expected skill, but he had received something infinitely more valuable: authenticity, depth, and the realization that music could be a mirror of the soul. He approached Lena after the applause, taking a careful step forward. I don't know what to say," he admitted, his voice unusually quiet. "You're extraordinary. I've never seen anyone play like that before." There was no trace of arrogance in his tone, only sincerity. For Adrian, this was a humbling experience, one that reminded him that true talent is as much about heart as it is about technique. Lena smiled softly, brushing a stray strand of hair from her face. "Thank you," she replied gently. I play because I love it. That's all." Her words were simple, but they carried the weight of honesty and truth. She didn't need to boast or compete. Her music spoke for her, and that was enough. The rest of the session continued, but the energy in the room had shifted. There was a newfound respect for Lena, a recognition that her talent was not only real but also extraordinary. People watched her with admiration, not just for her skill, but for her courage, humility, and the authenticity she brought to every note she played. Adrian, reflecting on the performance, realized that he had learned an invaluable lesson. He had always believed that confidence and technique could make a musician great, but Lena had shown him that greatness also required heart, vulnerability, and the courage to be oneself. Her music had not only impressed him, it had inspired him to rethink his own approach to music and life. As the hall began to empty, Lena gathered her things slowly, savoring the sense of fulfillment that came from expressing herself fully. She had faced judgment, doubt, and expectation, and yet she had remained true to her own voice. Her music had touched the hearts of everyone present, leaving a lasting impression that would not soon fade. Adrian lingered near the piano, watching her leave. He understood now that true talent could not be measured by appearances, reputation, or ego. Lena's quiet strength, authenticity, and connection with the music had left him humbled and inspired. He felt a deep sense of respect and even a quiet admiration that he had never experienced before. Lena stepped out of the hall, the afternoon sun warming her face. She felt a sense of peace, knowing that she had given her all to the music, that she had stayed true to herself, and that her performance had moved people in ways she could never fully describe. For her, this was not about applause or recognition. It was about expression, courage, and the joy of sharing something deeply personal with others. Adrian left shortly after, his mind buzzing with thoughts about music, humility, and respect. He had witnessed something extraordinary, and he knew that it had changed him. Lena had shown him that music was not a competition, not a display of superiority, but a bridge between hearts, a way to connect, inspire, and teach. That day, both Lena and Adrian carried something with them that would last far beyond the music hall. Lena carried the quiet satisfaction of knowing she had stayed true to herself, while Adrian carried the humility and wisdom that came from witnessing someone so talented, so authentic, and so brave. And the audience carried the memory of a performance that had been more than music. It had been a lesson in courage, authenticity, and the power of heart. The following week, the community music hall was buzzing with excitement more than ever. Word of Lena's performances had spread beyond the usual crowd, and people who had never attended before were curious to see this quiet young woman whose music had captivated everyone. The hall was almost full, with people arriving early to make sure they had seats. There was a sense of anticipation in the air, like everyone knew that something special was about to happen. Lena arrived a little earlier than usual. She carried her small bag, dressed simply as always, with no intention of standing out. She wasn't seeking attention or praise. She just loved the music, the atmosphere, and the feeling of being around people who appreciated it. When she walked in, her eyes scanned the room and landed on Adrian. He was already there, standing near the piano, but this time he looked different. He wasn't smug, arrogant, or dismissive. Instead, he seemed thoughtful, almost reflective. He had been humbled by her previous performances, and now he appeared genuinely curious. Lena moved quietly toward a seat in the back, her heart beating with a mix of nerves and excitement. She had grown more confident in recent weeks, but the thought of playing in front of a larger audience filled her with a familiar tension. She reminded herself that she was not performing to impress anyone. She was performing because she loved the piano, because music was a part of her, and because she wanted to share a piece of herself through it. The session began with several performers taking turns at the piano. Some played with skill, others with raw enthusiasm, but all were overshadowed by the quiet anticipation that Lena might play. People whispered about her, wondering if she would accept the invitation to perform again. There was a sense of respect in their voices now, a recognition that her talent was real, that her performances were more than just skill, they carried heart, emotion, and authenticity. Finally, the organizer of the event made an announcement. "If anyone would like to play, now is the time," she said warmly. The room grew quiet, all eyes subtly turning toward Lena. She felt a spark of nervousness, but also a quiet determination. She stood slowly, smoothing her clothes and taking a deep breath. She walked toward the piano, each step measured and calm. The audience sensed the importance of the moment, and the energy in the room shifted. Adrian watched her intently. He had experienced her talent before, but now he felt a mix of curiosity, admiration, and humility. He had learned from her previous performances that true skill was not just about notes and technique. It was about connection, heart, and authenticity. He realized that what Lena had done was rare. She had captured the hearts of an audience. Without needing to show off or assert superiority, Lena approached the piano, her hands brushing over the polished keys as she took her seat. She closed her eyes for a moment, centering herself, and allowed herself to feel the music before even touching the keys. When she pressed the first note, it was soft, delicate, yet full of intention. It immediately drew the audience in, and the hall seemed to hold its breath. As she played, Lena allowed herself to explore freely. She had learned from her previous performances that the audience could feel the honesty in her music, and she trusted that feeling. Her fingers moved across the keys with confidence and grace, the melody flowing naturally, rich with emotion. Each note seemed to tell a story of years spent practicing quietly, of learning patience, of experiencing moments of doubt and triumph. The audience was mesmerized. People leaned forward, listening intently, their eyes fixed on Lena as she played. Even those who had been skeptical before were captivated, realizing that there was something extraordinary about her talent. It wasn't just technical skill, they could feel the heart in her music, the connection between the performer and the piano, and the way she communicated without words. Adrian, standing near the back, felt a mix of awe and humility. He had seen countless performers, some highly trained, some naturally gifted, but he had never encountered anyone who could combine skill, emotion, and authenticity in this way. Lena's playing had a depth that he could not replicate, no matter how much he tried. For the first time, he truly understood that music was not about proving superiority, it was about expression, connection, and sharing something real. As the piece continued, Lena allowed herself to fully immerse in the music. She let her emotions guide her fingers, letting the piano speak the words she could not. There was power in her playing, but also vulnerability. Each chord and note seemed to reach out to the audience, touching something deep within them. People were silent, completely absorbed, feeling every emotion she expressed. The climax of her performance was breathtaking. The music built gradually, growing in intensity and complexity, yet every note remained precise and deliberate. Lena's hands moved effortlessly, guiding the melody with sensitivity and control. The audience was spellbound, feeling the emotion of each note, the story in each chord. They could sense the years of practice, the love for the music, and the courage it took for her to share it so openly. When the final note faded into silence, The hall remained still for a moment, as if holding on to the last vibrations of the piano. Then, slowly, applause erupted, louder and more enthusiastic than ever before. People stood, cheered, and clapped, showing their admiration and respect. Lena opened her eyes and allowed herself a small smile, grateful for the appreciation, but not dependent on it. Adrian approached her, his usual confidence replaced by sincerity. "That was incredible," he said, his voice low and genuine. "I've never seen anyone play like that before. You have something special." There was no arrogance in his tone, only respect. He had been humbled, inspired, and reminded of what true talent really meant. Lena nodded, her smile soft and calm. "Thank you," she said simply. "I just play because I love it. That's all." Her words were simple, but they carried a depth that resonated with Adrian and everyone who heard them. She didn't need to boast or compete. Her music spoke louder than any words ever could. The rest of the session continued, but the energy in the room had shifted permanently. People looked at Lena with admiration, not just for her skill, but for the authenticity and courage she displayed. Her presence had changed the atmosphere, inspiring others to focus on the heart of music rather than appearances or competition. Adrian stayed for a while, reflecting on what he had witnessed. He realized that talent alone was not enough. Humility, sincerity, and heart were equally important. Lena had taught him a lesson that he would carry for the rest of his life. He had learned to appreciate music differently, to value authenticity over showmanship, and to approach every performance with respect for others and for the art itself. After the session ended, Lena left the hall slowly, savoring the sense of fulfillment that came from expressing herself fully. She had faced doubt, judgment, and expectation, and she had remained true to her own voice. Her music had touched hearts, inspired others, and even changed the perspective of someone who had once seemed untouchable. For Lena, that was the greatest reward. As she stepped outside, the afternoon sun warmed her face. She felt a quiet peace, a deep satisfaction that came not from applause or recognition, but from knowing that she had shared a piece of herself with the world. Music had the power to transform, to teach, and to inspire, and she had experienced that power firsthand. Adrian followed a few minutes later, his mind full of thoughts and reflections. He watched Lena walk down the street, carrying herself simply and gracefully, unaware of the impact she had made on him and everyone in the hall. He knew that he had witnessed something rare and extraordinary, and that it had changed the way he viewed music, talent, and even people. For Lena, the world seemed brighter, fuller, and more connected. She had discovered that courage was not always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it was quiet, patient, and unassuming. It was stepping forward, trusting in oneself, and letting your passion shine without fear of judgment. Her music had done more than entertain. It had inspired, humbled, and reminded people of the beauty of authenticity. For Adrian, the lesson was equally profound. He had been reminded that arrogance and pride could blind a person to the true essence of talent. He had learned to value heart, sincerity, and humility, and to respect the gifts of others without comparison or competition. Lena's music had opened his eyes to a deeper understanding of what it truly meant to be a musician and a human being, and for everyone who had heard her play that day, the memory of Lena's performance would stay with them forever. It was more than notes on a page. More than skill or technique, it was a story of courage, authenticity, and the quiet power of the human heart expressed through music. As the sun began to set, Lena walked home with a gentle smile, feeling content and grateful. She had faced doubt, judgment, and expectations, and had triumphed not by showing off, but by being herself. Her music had touched hearts, taught lessons, and inspired change. And in that moment, she understood something deeply. The greatest victories in life are often quiet, subtle, and deeply personal. The day ended, but the impact of her music lingered in the hearts of everyone who had listened. Adrian, the audience, and Lena herself had all been changed in some way. And in the quiet streets outside the music hall, Lena carried with her a profound sense of fulfillment, knowing that she had shared something